The billionaire CEO, disguised as a janitor, watched his security guard steal $300 from the register. But when he saw who the money was really for, everything he thought he knew about good and evil shattered in an instant. What happened in the next 60 seconds would either destroy 2 lives forever, or expose the deadliest conspiracy in corporate America. He watched through the security monitors as his most trusted guard's hands moved toward the register, and Thaddeus Whitmore felt his heart shatter, until he saw what the man was really reaching for. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to smash that subscribe button for more. Also, share your thoughts, and let me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow's story is going to be just as epic, so don't miss out. Now, let's continue. The November rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Whitmore Electronics, casting shifting shadows across the gleaming displays of smartphones and laptops. At 42, Thaddeus Whitmore possessed the kind of quiet authority that came from building an empire from scratch. Tall, lean frame, always impeccably dressed, salt and pepper beard trimmed to perfection, and intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. Tonight, those eyes were tired. He adjusted the worn baseball cap pulled low over his face and zipped up the maintenance worker's jacket he'd borrowed from the company's uniform closet. For 3 months, he'd been conducting these undercover visits to his 12 store locations, driven by reports of inventory shrinkage and employee complaints that never seemed to reach his executive floor. The irony wasn't lost on him. The boy who'd once been followed through stores by suspicious security guards was now the owner, watching his own empire from the shadows. Across the city, 58-year-old Crispin Holloway was lacing up his black work boots in the tiny kitchen of his studio apartment. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of construction work before a back injury forced him into security, moved with the deliberate precision of a man who'd learned that every detail mattered when you had nothing left to lose. Crispin stood before the cracked bathroom mirror, smoothing down his graying hair. Deep lines etched his ebony face, each one earned through years of supporting his late wife through cancer treatments and raising their daughter alone after she passed. His security uniform hung loose on his increasingly thin frame, stress and skipped meals taking their toll. "Another night, Lorraine," he whispered to the photo on his nightstand, his wife's warm smile looking back at him. "Gonna keep our promise to Sage. College funds almost there." He kissed 2 fingers and pressed them to the glass before heading out into the rain. Whitmore Electronics. Crispin had found more than just a job, he'd found purpose. In 8 months, he'd reduced theft by 60%, not through aggression, but through conversation. He learned the regular customers' names, helped elderly shoppers navigate the latest technology, and somehow managed to redirect potential shoplifters toward payment plans instead of handcuffs. The other employees loved him. Customers requested him specifically. And Thaddeus Whitmore, watching through corporate reports, had noticed the remarkable turnaround at the flagship store. What Thaddeus didn't know was that Crispin had been volunteering his off hours to teach digital literacy classes at the community center, using his employee discount to help families afford their first computers. What Crispin didn't know was that someone had been watching his kindness and plotting to use it against him. As Thaddeus pushed through the back entrance of his store, nodding to the night manager who assumed he was there for routine maintenance, he felt the familiar weight of expectations. These undercover visits had revealed lazy managers, dishonest cashiers, and practices that made his stomach turn. Tonight, he hoped for something different. The store hummed with quiet activity. Late evening shoppers browsed the aisles while soft jazz played overhead, Crispin's suggestion to create a more welcoming atmosphere. Thaddeus noticed immediately how relaxed everyone seemed, how naturally conversations flowed between staff and customers. Then he saw him. Crispin stood near the customer service desk, his uniform pressed despite its age, helping an elderly Hispanic woman understand the features of a tablet. His voice carried genuine warmth as he patiently explained each function, occasionally switching to broken but earnest Spanish when English failed. "This one, Mrs. Valdez, it has the bigger letters you needed. And see this button? Your granddaughter can call you right from here, like magic. The woman's eyes lit up. Very, Dad? She lives so far away. I know, Senora. Family shouldn't feel far away. Crispin's voice carried a depth of understanding that made Thaddeus pause. Let me show you our payment plan. Very gentle on the wallet, I promise. Thaddeus found himself leaning against a display, genuinely curious about this man whose statistics looked so impressive on paper. There was something about Crispin's presence, the way other employees gravitated toward him, how customers visibly relaxed in his orbit. But as the evening wore on, Thaddeus began to notice other things. The way Crispin's eyes lingered on expensive items when he thought no one was looking. How he seemed to know exactly when the security cameras rotated. The casual way he touched merchandise, as if mentally cataloging value. Here we go again, Thaddeus thought, his heart sinking. Another disappointment. At 9:47 p.m., 13 minutes before closing, everything changed. Thaddeus was reviewing inventory sheets in the back office when raised voices echoed from the main floor. Through the security monitors, he watched a young man in a hoodie grab a laptop from the display and sprint toward the exit. What happened next would replay in Thaddeus's mind for years to come. The laptop thief had barely made it 3 steps toward the exit when Crispin moved, not with the aggression Thaddeus expected, but with the fluid grace of someone who understood that violence was always the last option, never the first. Hey there, son, Crispin called out, his voice carrying across the store with surprising gentleness. The young man couldn't be more than 19, with hollow cheeks and clothes that had seen too many nights on the street, froze mid-stride, clutching the MacBook against his chest like a shield. Through the security monitors, Thaddeus watched, transfixed, as Crispin slowly approached with his hands visible, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. I see you there, and I see what you're carrying. But before you make a choice you can't take back, how about we just talk for a minute? The kid's eyes darted between Crispin and the door, his whole body trembling, not from cold, but from the kind of desperation that made good people do terrible things. I can't. The boy whispered, and Thaddeus had to adjust the monitor volume to catch his words. I can't go to jail, man. My little sister, she's only 8, and if they take me. His voice cracked, and Crispin's expression softened in a way that made Thaddeus's chest tighten unexpectedly. What's your name, son? Crispin asked, and when the boy hesitated, he added, Mine's Crispin. Been working security here for 8 months. And you know what I've learned? Most folks who walk through that door aren't bad people, they're just people in bad situations. The young man's grip on the laptop loosened slightly. Kieran, he mumbled. My name's Kieran. Crispin nodded as if this introduction was the most natural thing in the world, despite the fact that Kieran was technically still stealing thousands of dollars worth of merchandise. Kieran's a good name. Irish, right? My late wife always said Irish names carried strength. He took another careful step closer, and Thaddeus found himself holding his breath. Now, Kieran, I'm guessing you didn't wake up this morning planning to steal from my store. So tell me, what happened that brought you here tonight? The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility, and Thaddeus realized he was witnessing something he'd never seen before. A security guard treating a thief like a human being first, and a criminal second. Kieran's composure crumbled. The electricity got shut off yesterday. My sister Maeve, she's diabetic, and her insulin needs to stay cold, but the fridge. He gestured helplessly. I thought maybe I could sell this, get enough for the deposit to turn the power back on. I know it's wrong, I know, but she's all I got left, man. Our parents died in a car crash 2 years ago, and I've been trying so hard to keep us together, but everything's just. He wiped his nose with his free hand, and Thaddeus could see tears streaming down his face through the high-definition security feed. Without warning, Crispin reached into his wallet, and Thaddeus's heart stopped. Through 8 months of security footage reviews, he'd seen this exact motion precede countless instances of employee theft: the casual reach, the quick palm of cash from a register, the smooth transaction that happened too fast for most cameras to catch clearly. This was it. This was the moment his trusted security guard revealed himself to be just another disappointment, another person who would exploit his position for personal gain. But instead of walking toward the register, Crispin pulled out a worn piece of paper and unfolded it carefully. Even through the monitor, Thaddeus could see it was a bank receipt, and his heart nearly stopped when he realized what he was looking at. Crispin was showing Kieran his bank balance, $847.32. "You see this, son? This is everything I got in the world right now. Been saving every penny for my daughter's college fund since my wife passed. Sage is going to be the first person in our family to get a degree, and this money represents 2 years of overtime shifts and skipped meals." Kieran stared at the receipt, confusion evident on his young face. "Why are you showing me this?" Crispin folded the paper carefully and placed it back in his wallet, then did something that made Thaddeus grip the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles went white. The security guard walked to the register, entered his employee code, and began counting out bills. "Because," Crispin said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, "some things matter more than money. Some things matter more than dreams. And no little girl should go without her medicine because the world forgot how to take care of its children." He counted out $300, more than a third of his life savings, and held it out to Kieran. "This should cover your electric deposit and leave enough for groceries. But I need you to promise me something, son. I need you to promise me you'll never come back here with the intention to steal again. Not because I'll call the police, I won't, but because you're better than this moment. You're better than what desperation tried to make you tonight." Kieran stared at the money like it might disappear if he blinked, his hand shaking as he slowly set the laptop back on its display stand. "I can't take your money, man. That's for your daughter's college." But Crispin was already pressing the bills into Kieran's palm, his weathered hands gentle but insistent. "My Sage would be the first person to tell you to take it. She's got a heart bigger than Texas, just like her mama did. And you know what? She's smart enough that scholarships will help with college. But your sister Maeve? She needs this medicine now. Sometimes the right choice isn't the easy choice, son. Sometimes love means sacrificing your own dreams so someone else can have a tomorrow." Through the security monitor, Thaddeus watched Kieran break down completely, his thin shoulders shaking as sobs racked his body. "Why?" the young man whispered. "Why would you do this for someone you don't even know?" Crispin's response came without hesitation. "Because somebody did it for me once, when I was about your age and just as lost. And because if we don't take care of each other, who will?" He placed a gentle hand on Kieran's shoulder. "You go take care of your sister. Get that power turned back on. And if you ever need help finding work, real work, you come back here and ask for me. I know people who need good employees, and anyone willing to risk everything for family is exactly the kind of person I want to recommend." Kieran clutched the money to his chest, tears streaming freely. "I'll pay you back, I swear. Every single dollar." Crispin smiled, and even through the grainy security footage, Thaddeus could see the genuine warmth in his expression. "The best way to pay me back is to pass it forward someday. When you're older and stable, and you see someone else in the position you're in tonight, you remember this moment. You remember that kindness is a choice we make, not a luxury we can afford." As Kieran headed toward the door, clutching the money that would save his sister's life, he turned back one last time. "Mr. Crispin? Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for seeing past what I almost did tonight." And then he was gone, disappearing into the November rain, leaving Crispin standing alone by the register, and leaving Thaddeus Whitmore staring at his security monitor in complete, speechless shock, every assumption he'd ever made about human nature crumbling around him like yesterday's newspaper. Thaddeus sat in the cramped back office, his hands trembling as he rewound the security footage for the 5th time, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. The maintenance worker disguise suddenly felt suffocating, the borrowed jacket too tight across his shoulders, the baseball cap now damp with perspiration. He'd built his fortune on reading people, on understanding motivations and predicting behaviors, yet everything he thought he knew had just been obliterated by a 58-year-old security guard who'd given away a third of his life savings to a would-be thief. The logical part of his brain, the part that had survived boardroom battles and hostile takeovers, whispered dangerous possibilities. What if this was all an elaborate setup? What if Crispin and the kid were working together? What if you just witnessed the most sophisticated theft you've ever seen? But even as these thoughts formed, Thaddeus found himself rejecting them. The raw emotion on both men's faces, the genuine tears, the way Crispin's hands had shaken as he counted out those bills. You couldn't fake that level of authentic human connection. Could you? He pulled out his phone, fingers hovering over his head of security's contact. One call would initiate a full investigation. Background checks on both Crispin and this Kieran kid. Bank records. Phone logs. Within 24 hours, he'd have a complete picture of whether he'd witnessed an act of pure humanity or the most elaborate con in his company's history. But something held him back, a voice that sounded suspiciously like his grandmother's, the woman who'd raised him in South Chicago and taught him that sometimes the heart saw truths the mind couldn't calculate. Meanwhile, 3 floors above in the main store, Crispin was fighting his own internal war as he helped the remaining customers before closing time. His wallet felt impossibly light in his back pocket, and every few minutes, his hand would unconsciously drift to it, checking and rechecking that the remaining money was still there. "What have you done, old man?" a voice in his head demanded. "Sage has been working double shifts at the diner all summer, saving every tip for textbooks, and you just gave away 3 months of her college fund to a complete stranger." His phone buzzed with a text from his 20-year-old daughter. "Dad, just got my acceptance letter to the nursing program. They want a deposit by Friday. I'm so excited I can barely think straight." Crispin stared at the message, his throat tightening. The deposit Sage needed was exactly $300, the same amount he'd just handed to Kieran. He could lie, tell her he needed another week to get the money together, but Sage would see right through him. She'd inherited her mother's uncanny ability to read his moods, and she'd worry. The last thing he wanted was for his brilliant, ambitious daughter to stress about money when she should be celebrating the biggest achievement of her young life. He typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, "So proud of you, honey. We'll figure out the deposit. Love you more than words." But even as he sent it, doubt gnawed at him. What kind of father sacrificed his child's future for a stranger? What kind of man let his heart overrule his head so completely? Yet when he closed his eyes, he could still see Kieran's face, the desperation, the love for his sister, the way his entire body had sagged with relief when he realized he could save Maeve's life. How could Crispin regret that moment, even if it meant disappointing his own daughter? The tension reached a breaking point when, at exactly 9:58 p.m., 2 minutes before official closing time, Detective Amelia Rothschild walked through the front doors of Whitmore Electronics, her badge already visible and her expression grim. Thaddeus, still watching from the back office monitors, felt his blood run cold. He knew Amelia. She'd consulted on security for several of his stores, and her reputation for thoroughness was legendary. Behind her walked a thin man in an expensive suit who Thaddeus didn't recognize, followed by what appeared to be store security from the mall's main office. Crispin, who had been straightening merchandise near the front entrance, looked up with the polite smile he reserved for all customers, until he saw the badges. "Mr. Holloway?" Detective Rothschild's voice carried easily across the now quiet store. I'm Detective Rothschild, Metro PD. We need to speak with you about an incident that occurred here tonight. Thaddeus watched through the monitors as every employee in the store suddenly found reasons to busy themselves nearby, sensing drama. Crispin's face went carefully neutral, the expression of a man who'd had enough encounters with law enforcement to know that cooperation was survival. Of course, Detective. How can I help you? But the thin man in the suit stepped forward, his smile sharp as a blade. Mr. Holloway, I'm David Prescott, Assistant District Attorney. We have reason to believe you've been involved in an organized theft ring operating out of this location. The words hit the store like a physical blow. Thaddeus found himself gripping the desk so hard he was surprised the wood didn't crack. On the monitor, he could see Crispin's face cycle through confusion, hurt, and then a resigned sadness that was somehow worse than anger would have been. I'm sorry, sir, but I think there's been some kind of mistake, Crispin said quietly, his voice maintaining its dignity even as his world began to collapse. I've never stolen anything from this store. I've been working here for 8 months, and my record is clean. But Prescott was already pulling out a tablet, his movements theatrical and confident. Really? Because we have video evidence of you taking money from the register tonight and giving it to a known associate. We also have testimony from a confidential informant suggesting this isn't the first time. Thaddeus felt the world tilt sideways. Video evidence? He was the video evidence, and what he'd seen was the exact opposite of theft. But as he watched Prescott swipe through what appeared to be edited security footage on his tablet, a horrible realization began to dawn. Someone had been watching tonight's events and had somehow twisted them into something unrecognizable. The footage showed Crispin approaching the register, entering his code, and removing money, but it was edited to exclude Kieran entirely, to remove all context of the boy's desperation and Crispin's compassion. Without the full story, it looked exactly like theft. Furthermore, Prescott continued, clearly enjoying his moment, we have records showing significant discrepancies in store inventory during your shifts, Mr. Holloway. Items going missing, cash register shortages, all coinciding with your employment here. Crispin's face went ashen. That's not. I don't understand. Detective, I've never taken anything that wasn't mine. Tonight, yes, I gave money to a young man, but it was my own money from my own account. I can show you my bank records. Detective Rothschild, who had been silent during Prescott's performance, stepped forward with what seemed like genuine regret. Mr. Holloway, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. You're not under arrest at this time, but we strongly advise you to contact an attorney. Through the monitor, Thaddeus watched as Crispin's legs seemed to give out slightly. The proud man who had stood tall while giving away his life savings to a stranger now looked decades older, the weight of false accusations crushing his spirit in real time. My daughter, Crispin whispered, so quietly the microphones barely caught it. She just got into nursing school. This will destroy her. And that was the moment Thaddeus Whitmore stopped thinking like a CEO and started thinking like the grandson of a woman who'd taught him that sometimes you had to stand up and be counted, even when, especially when, it was the hardest thing in the world to do. He stood from his chair, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Revealing himself would blow his cover, potentially compromise months of investigation across his other stores. But staying silent would allow an innocent man to be destroyed by lies. As he reached for the door handle, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Enjoying the show, Mr. Whitmore? Drop your undercover investigation, or Mr. Holloway takes the fall for crimes he didn't commit. You have 24 hours to decide what matters more, your business or your employee's life. Thaddeus stared at the message, his blood running cold. Someone knew who he was. Someone had been watching him watch Crispin. And someone was using the most decent man he'd ever encountered as a pawn in a game whose rules he didn't yet understand. On the monitors, he watched as Detective Rothschild gently but firmly guided Crispin toward the exit. The security guard's shoulders bowed with shame he didn't deserve. The other employees stood in shocked silence, and Thaddeus realized that in 30 seconds, this good man would walk out of his store in disgrace, probably never to return. The decision crystallized in that moment. Thaddeus Whitmore had built his empire on calculated risks, but this wasn't about business anymore. This was about the kind of man he wanted to be when the lights went out and the cameras stopped rolling. He yanked open the office door and strode onto the main floor, his maintenance worker disguise suddenly feeling like the most expensive costume he'd ever worn. Detective Rothschild. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being heard, and every head in the store turned toward him. "I need to speak with you about Mr. Holloway's case. There's something you need to see." Prescott's face went white, then flushed red with what looked like panic. "Sir, this is police business. I'm going to have to ask you to." "My name is Thaddeus Whitmore," he said, pulling off the baseball cap and straightening to his full height. "I own this store, and I've been conducting undercover observations tonight. Mr. Holloway is innocent of every charge you're considering." The silence that followed was deafening. Crispin turned slowly, his eyes widening as he took in his boss's appearance. The maintenance uniform, the careful disguise, the weight of revelation settling between them like fog. For a moment, their eyes met across the store floor, and Thaddeus saw something he'd never expected to see directed at him. Not gratitude, but disappointment. "You were watching," Crispin said quietly, his voice heavy with a hurt that cut deeper than any accusation could have. "All this time you were watching, thinking I was a thief." And in that moment, Thaddeus realized that clearing Crispin's name might be the easy part. Earning back his trust, and forgiving himself for doubting the best person he'd ever encountered, would be the real challenge. But as Prescott began backing toward the exit and Detective Rothschild pulled out her own tablet to review the real security footage, Thaddeus knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wasn't walking away from this fight. Not tonight. Not ever. The police station's fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry insects as Thaddeus and Crispin found themselves sitting in Detective Rothschild's cramped office, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. 3 hours had passed since the confrontation at the store, 3 hours of statements and evidence review that had completely exonerated Crispin while opening a federal investigation into what appeared to be an elaborate extortion scheme targeting Thaddeus's company. David Prescott had vanished the moment Thaddeus revealed the unedited security footage, leaving behind only cryptic threats and the uncomfortable realization that someone with significant resources had orchestrated this entire evening. "Gentlemen," Detective Rothschild said, sliding a stack of papers across her desk, "I need you both to understand the gravity of what we're dealing with. Mr. Prescott wasn't really an assistant district attorney. His chair, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Revealing himself would blow his cover, potentially compromise months of investigation across his other stores. But staying silent would allow an innocent man to be destroyed by lies." As he reached for the door handle, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoying the show, Mr. Whitmore? Drop your undercover investigation, or Mr. Holloway takes the fall for crimes he didn't commit. You have 24 hours to decide what matters more, your business or your employee's life." Thaddeus stared at the message, his blood running cold. Someone knew who he was. Someone had been watching him watch Crispin. And someone was using the most decent man he'd ever encountered as a pawn in a game whose rules he didn't yet understand. On the monitors, he watched as Detective Rothschild gently but firmly guided Crispin toward the exit. The security guard's shoulders bowed with shame he didn't deserve. The other employees stood in shocked silence, and Thaddeus realized that in 30 seconds, this good man would walk out of his store in disgrace, probably never to return. The decision crystallized in that moment. Thaddeus Whitmore had built his empire on calculated risks, but this wasn't about business anymore. This was about the kind of man he wanted to be when the lights went out and the cameras stopped rolling. He yanked open the office door and strode onto the main floor, his maintenance worker disguise suddenly feeling like the most expensive costume he'd ever worn. Detective Rothschild. His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being heard, and every head in the store turned toward him. "I need to speak with you about Mr. Holloway's case. There's something you need to see." Prescott's face went white, then flushed red with what looked like panic. "Sir, this is police business. I'm going to have to ask you to." "My name is Thaddeus Whitmore," he said, pulling off the baseball cap and straightening to his full height. "I own this store, and I've been conducting undercover observations tonight. Mr. Holloway is innocent of every charge you're considering." The silence that followed was deafening. Crispin turned slowly, his eyes widening as he took in his boss's appearance. The maintenance uniform, the careful disguise, the weight of revelation settling between them like fog. For a moment, their eyes met across the store floor, and Thaddeus saw something he'd never expected to see directed at him. Not gratitude, but disappointment. "You were watching," Crispin said quietly, his voice heavy with a hurt that cut deeper than any accusation could have. "All this time you were watching, thinking I was a thief." And in that moment, Thaddeus realized that clearing Crispin's name might be the easy part. Earning back his trust, and forgiving himself for doubting the best person he'd ever encountered, would be the real challenge. But as Prescott began backing toward the exit and Detective Rothschild pulled out her own tablet to review the real security footage, Thaddeus knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wasn't walking away from this fight. Not tonight. Not ever. The police station's fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry insects as Thaddeus and Crispin found themselves sitting in Detective Rothschild's cramped office, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. 3 hours had passed since the confrontation at the store, 3 hours of statements and evidence review that had completely exonerated Crispin while opening a federal investigation into what appeared to be an elaborate extortion scheme targeting Thaddeus's company. David Prescott had vanished the moment Thaddeus revealed the unedited security footage, leaving behind only cryptic threats and the uncomfortable realization that someone with significant resources had orchestrated this entire evening. "Gentlemen," Detective Rothschild said, sliding a stack of papers across her desk, "I need you both to understand the gravity of what we're dealing with. Mr. Prescott wasn't really an assistant district attorney. His credentials were fake, sophisticated, but fake. The edited footage he showed us was created by someone with professional-level video manipulation skills. And the confidential informant, who supposedly provided testimony against Mr. Holloway, doesn't exist." She leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. "Someone went to extraordinary lengths to frame you, Mr. Holloway, and we believe it's connected to the threats against Mr. Whitmore's investigation. Until we can identify who's behind this, I'm recommending you both accept protective custody." Crispin's laugh was bitter, devoid of any humor. "Protective custody. That's rich. Protect me from what? From people who think I'm a thief, or from bosses who spy on their employees dressed as janitors?" His words hit Thaddeus like physical blows, each one deserved but no less painful for their accuracy. The silence stretched between them, filled with years of unspoken assumptions and tonight's revelations that had shattered everything they thought they knew about each other. Thaddeus shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair, his expensive suit wrinkled and his carefully maintained composure cracking under the weight of Crispin's disappointment. "Mr. Holloway, Crispin, I know how this must look, but you have to understand—" "No, Mr. Whitmore," Crispin interrupted, his voice steady but carrying a depth of hurt that made Thaddeus's chest ache. "You don't get to explain this away with corporate speak and good intentions. For 8 months, I've worked my heart out for your company. I've stayed late, come in early, treated every customer like family. I've turned your highest theft location into your most profitable, not through fear or aggression, but by treating people with dignity. And all this time, you thought I was stealing from you. He stood and walked to the small window, his back rigid with wounded pride. Do you know what hurts the most? It's not that you suspected me. Hell, I'm a black man working security in retail. I'm used to suspicion. It's that you saw me give my life savings to that boy tonight, saw me choose compassion over self-interest, and your first thought was still that I might be running some kind of con. Detective Rothschild watched this exchange with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen relationships destroyed by far less significant betrayals. Mr. Holloway, I understand your anger, but right now, your safety and Mr. Whitmore's are interconnected. Whoever orchestrated tonight's events has resources, patience, and a clear willingness to destroy innocent people to achieve their goals. We need you both in a secure location until we can unravel this conspiracy. But Crispin was already shaking his head, his weathered hands clenched into fists at his sides. I can't. My daughter Sage, she's working a double shift tonight at the diner, and she doesn't even know what happened. She's expecting me to call her about her college deposit, and I can't. His voice cracked, and he pressed his palm against the window. I can't disappoint her again. I already gave away the money she needed, and now you want me to disappear when she needs me most. The raw pain in his voice seemed to galvanize Thaddeus, who had been sitting in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of his failures. The college deposit, he said quietly, remembering the text message he'd glimpsed on Crispin's phone. How much does she need? But Crispin whirled around, his eyes flashing with an anger that was somehow worse than shouting. Don't you dare try to fix this with money. You think you can write a check and make everything better? Make up for the fact that you've been watching me like a criminal for months while I've been bleeding myself dry to serve your customers with honor. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and Thaddeus felt something inside him break, not from anger, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization of how deeply he'd wounded a man who deserved nothing but respect. The breakthrough came at 2:17 a.m., when Detective Rothschild's phone rang with news that changed everything. She listened intently, scribbling notes, her expression growing, increasingly serious. When she hung up, both men looked at her expectantly, their personal conflict temporarily set aside. That was the FBI Cybercrimes Unit. They traced the source of the edited footage and the fake credentials. Gentlemen, you're both targets of something much bigger than we initially thought. She turned her laptop screen toward them, revealing a complex web of financial documents and surveillance photos. There's a corporate espionage ring that's been systematically targeting successful minority-owned businesses, particularly those that have grown rapidly without traditional backing. Mr. Whitmore, your company's success story, building an electronics empire from nothing, made you a priority target. They've been looking for vulnerabilities, ways to discredit you or force you into partnerships that would essentially strip away your control. Thaddeus stared at the screen, seeing photos of himself entering various stores, timestamps going back months. But why frame Crispin? He's not involved in corporate decisions. Detective Rothschild highlighted a section of the report. Because Mr. Holloway represents something that threatens their narrative. They need to paint you as either a criminal or someone who can't maintain proper oversight of your business. A security guard who reduces theft while building customer loyalty? That's the kind of employee that proves good management and challenges their claim that minority-owned businesses are inherently unstable. She looked at Crispin with something approaching admiration. Your success at that store, your reputation with customers and staff, it's evidence that Mr. Whitmore knows how to hire and inspire good people. They needed to destroy that evidence. The weight of this revelation settled over them both, reframing everything that had happened tonight. Crispin slowly returned to his chair, his anger giving way to a weary understanding. So I was never really the target. I was just collateral damage. No, Thaddeus said firmly, surprising them both with the intensity in his voice. You were the target because you're extraordinary. Because what you did tonight, giving away your daughter's college money to save a stranger's sister, that's the kind of story that proves everything I've always believed about human nature. And there are people who profit from the world believing the worst about each other. He looked directly at Crispin for the first time since leaving the store. I came to your location expecting to find theft and corruption because that's what I'd found at most of my other stores. But instead, I found you. And instead of celebrating that, instead of recognizing that I'd hired someone whose integrity puts my own to shame, I let suspicion poison what should have been gratitude. Detective Rothschild cleared her throat gently. The safe house is ready, but I need to be clear, this investigation could take weeks. You'll essentially be roommates in a federal witness protection facility until we can neutralize the threat. Given the personal tensions here, I have to ask, can you two handle being in close quarters without killing each other? Crispin and Thaddeus exchanged glances, years of unspoken assumptions and tonight's painful revelations hanging between them like a bridge they weren't sure they could cross. But before either could answer, Crispin's phone buzzed with another text from Sage. Dad, I saw the news about something happening at your store. Are you okay? I'm scared. Please call me. The simple message seemed to deflate the last of Crispin's anger, replacing it with the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who'd spent too many years carrying too much weight alone. My daughter doesn't know about any of this. She's probably terrified, thinking I'm hurt or arrested or worse. He looked at Thaddeus with something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't hatred either. I need to call her, but I don't know what to say. How do I explain that her father's life got turned upside down because he works for a good company that bad people want to destroy? Thaddeus felt something shift inside him, a recognition that this wasn't about corporate espionage or federal investigations anymore. This was about a father trying to protect his daughter's dreams, about a man whose greatest crime was caring too much about everyone except himself. Let me call her, Thaddeus heard himself say, the words surprising him as much as they surprised Crispin. Let me explain what happened tonight, what kind of man her father really is. Let me tell her that her college deposit is taken care of, and that when this is all over, her father will have a job waiting for him, not as a security guard, but as a partner in building something better. Crispin stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or the kind of integrity that Crispin himself had demonstrated so powerfully just hours before. Finally, slowly, he nodded. Okay, he said quietly. But not because I forgive you yet. And not because money fixes what happened tonight. But because Sage deserves to know that sometimes, even when everything seems broken, good people still exist. As Detective Rothschild began finalizing the arrangements for their protective custody, neither man could have predicted that their forced proximity would become the foundation for a friendship that would transform both their lives, and ultimately, the very nature of what it meant to build a business based on trust, respect, and the radical belief that everyone deserved a second chance to show who they really were. The federal safe house sat nestled in the Virginia countryside like a suburban secret, its unremarkable beige exterior hiding state-of-the-art security systems and bulletproof windows. For 3 days, Thaddeus and Crispin had maintained an uneasy truce, sharing meals in polite silence and occupying opposite ends of the modest living space like cautious animals learning each other's rhythms. The tension finally cracked on Thursday evening when Crispin found Thaddeus sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by financial documents and his laptop, frantically working his phone despite the late hour. Sage's tuition deposit went through, Thaddeus said without looking up, his voice carrying a weight that suggested this simple transaction had cost him more than money. Full scholarship applications are submitted, and I've arranged for her to have a part-time position in my company's IT department when she's ready. Flexible hours, good pay, full benefits. Crispin stood in the doorway, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips, unsure how to process this information. For 3 days, he'd been wrestling with anger, gratitude, and a confusing mixture of both that left him exhausted. "Why?" he asked finally, the single word carrying months of questions. Thaddeus finally looked up, and Crispin was startled to see exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Because 23 years ago, I was Kieran." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither man was sure they wanted to cross. "I was 19, desperate, and convinced that the world owed me something I was never going to get honestly. My grandmother, the woman who raised me after my parents died in a factory fire, she was dying of kidney disease, and I'd already dropped out of community college to work 3 jobs trying to pay for her dialysis. It wasn't enough. It was never enough." Thaddeus closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, his expensive clothes wrinkled from days of stress. "So I started stealing. Small stuff at first, groceries, medicine, anything I could resell. I told myself it was noble, that I was Robin Hood taking from corporations to save my grandmother's life. But theft is theft, and eventually I got caught. I was working at an electronics store, ironic, right? When the manager caught me pocketing cash from the register. I was dead to rights, had the money in my hand, and I knew my life was over. One conviction would mean no college, no legitimate jobs, no way to help my grandmother except through more crime." Thaddeus's hands trembled slightly as he spoke, the memory clearly still painful after more than 2 decades. But instead of calling the police, this manager, a Korean war veteran named Harold Brennan, sat me down and asked me the same question you asked Kieran: "What happened that brought you here tonight?" And I broke down, Crispin. This tough kid from South Chicago, this young man who thought he was so smart and so hard, dissolved into tears telling a stranger about watching my grandmother fade away while I counted pennies and prayed for miracles. The admission seemed to drain something from Thaddeus, leaving him looking younger and more vulnerable than Crispin had ever seen him. Harold didn't just let me go. He drove me to the hospital where my grandmother was receiving treatment, marched up to the billing department, and paid off her entire medical debt. $47,000. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. Then he offered me a real job with real responsibility, and said something I've never forgotten: "Son, the difference between a good man and a bad man isn't whether they stumble. It's whether they let someone help them get back up." Crispin set down his coffee mug and slowly took a seat across from Thaddeus, seeing his boss, his friend, in an entirely new light. What happened to Harold? Cancer took him 8 years later, but by then, he'd taught me everything about running a business with integrity. About hiring people for their character instead of their credentials. About second chances and third chances and believing in people even when they don't believe in themselves. Thaddeus wiped his eyes, not bothering to hide the tears. "When I started my own company, I swore I'd build it on Harold's principles. And for 23 years, I thought I had. Until I found myself dressed as a janitor, spying on the best employee I've ever had, because somewhere along the way, I forgot that trust has to be earned by giving it first." The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable tensions of the previous days, warmer, more thoughtful, heavy with the weight of shared understanding. Finally, Crispin spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "My story isn't as dramatic as yours, but it's got its own ghosts." He stared out the window at the Virginia countryside, gathering courage from the familiar rhythm of his words. "I met Lorraine when I was 26, working construction in Detroit. She was a teacher at the elementary school where my crew was building an addition, and she used to bring us lemonade during our lunch breaks. Prettiest woman I'd ever seen, with this laugh that could make you forget every worry you'd ever had." His face softened with memory, the harsh lines of stress giving way to something gentler. "We were married within a year, and Sage came along 2 years later. For 15 years, we had the kind of marriage that made other people jealous, not because we were rich, because we weren't, but because we were partners in everything. Lorraine would grade papers while I balanced our checkbook, I'd help her set up her classroom while she packed my lunch. We tag-teamed parenting like we'd been doing it for centuries instead of just figuring it out as we went. The warmth in his voice began to fade, replaced by something harder and more painful. Then Lorraine found the lump. Stage 4 breast cancer, already spread to her lymph nodes by the time they caught it. The doctors said aggressive treatment might give her 2 years, maybe 3 if we were lucky. Crispin's hands clenched into fists on the table. Do you know what cancer treatment costs, Thaddeus? Do you know what it's like to watch the love of your life fade away while you're choosing between her medicine and your daughter's school supplies? I worked every overtime shift I could get, took on weekend jobs, sold everything we owned that wasn't nailed down. And it still wasn't enough. The insurance company found reasons to deny claims. The experimental treatments weren't covered. The travel to specialist appointments, the hotel stays, the lost wages when I had to choose between work and being with my wife, it all added up faster than I could earn it. Crispin's voice cracked, and he had to pause to compose himself. Near the end, when Lorraine was spending more time in the hospital than at home, I started noticing things. Other families in the cancer ward, fighting the same battles we were fighting, going broke trying to save the people they loved. And I saw something else. I saw how the wealthy patients got different treatment. Not better medical care, necessarily, but different access. Private rooms, faster test results, experimental drugs that weren't available to the rest of us. The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut glass. So I made a decision that haunts me to this day. I started taking things from the construction sites, copper wire, expensive tools, anything I could resell to supplement Lorraine's treatment fund. Just small stuff at first, things that wouldn't be missed. But construction foremen notice everything, and eventually I got caught. He met Thaddeus's eyes, and both men recognized the parallel to the story they'd just heard. The site supervisor was this old Italian guy named Tony Marconi, must have been in his 70s but still climbed scaffolding like a man half his age. He caught me red-handed with $1,000 worth of copper tubing, and I knew I was done. Criminal charges, job loss, no way to pay for Lorraine's care, my whole world was about to collapse. But then Crispin's expression shifted, and Thaddeus saw an echo of his own gratitude and pain. Tony didn't call the police. Instead, he sat me down and said, "Kid, I've been watching you work for 6 months, and you're one of the best carpenters I've ever seen. You think I don't know why you're stealing? You think I don't see the exhaustion in your eyes, the way you check your phone every 10 minutes hoping for good news from the hospital?" Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card for his nephew, who ran a medical billing advocacy service. Crispin smiled through his tears. Tony's nephew fought the insurance company for free, got thousands of dollars in claims approved that had been denied, and helped us navigate a patient assistance program that covered most of Lorraine's experimental treatment. We got 6 more months with her. 6 precious, beautiful months that I never would have had if Tony Marconi had called the police instead of offering help. The 2 men sat in silence, the weight of their shared experiences creating a bond that transcended employer and employee, transcended the suspicions and misunderstandings that had brought them to this moment. Lorraine died on a Tuesday morning in spring, Crispin continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Sage was 16, and I was 43 years old with a back injury that ended my construction career and a grief so deep I wasn't sure I'd ever find my way out of it. But on her deathbed, Lorraine made me promise 2 things: that I'd make sure Sage got the education she'd always dreamed of, and that I'd find ways to pass forward the kindness that Tony had shown us. She said, "Crispin, honey, the world tried to break us, but good people kept putting us back together. Now it's your turn to be someone's Tony Marconi." The implications of this story settled over Thaddeus like a warm blanket and a crushing weight simultaneously. Every act of kindness he'd witnessed Crispin perform, every moment of compassion that had made him such an extraordinary employee, had been born from this crucible of loss and grace. "That's why you gave Kieran the money," Thaddeus said, understanding flooding through him. "That's why you've turned our highest theft store into our most successful location. You've been looking for opportunities to be someone's Tony Marconi." Crispin nodded, tears flowing freely now. "For 8 months, I thought I'd found the perfect place to honor Lorraine's memory. A job where I could protect people and property while still showing kindness to folks who were struggling. I thought I'd found a boss who valued integrity over profit, employees over statistics. And then I discovered that same boss had been watching me like a criminal for months, and I realized that maybe I was just fooling myself about what kind of man I really was, or what kind of company I was working for." The admission hung between them like a challenge, and Thaddeus felt the full weight of his betrayal in a way that corporate board meetings and hostile takeovers had never prepared him for. This wasn't about business strategies or competitive advantages. This was about a man who had chosen to build his life around honoring his dead wife's legacy, only to discover that the person he'd trusted with that sacred mission had been secretly questioning his integrity. "Crispin," Thaddeus said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to understand something. The reason I started those undercover visits wasn't because I suspected you specifically. It was because I'd lost faith in my ability to judge character, to build the kind of company Harold Brennan taught me to value. I'd been burned so many times by employees who seemed trustworthy but turned out to be stealing or cutting corners that I started to believe maybe Harold's idealism was naive. Maybe trusting people was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore." He leaned forward, desperate to make Crispin understand. "But watching you work, seeing the way you treat customers and colleagues, witnessing what you did for Kieran, you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. You reminded me that Harold wasn't naive. He was right. There are still people in this world who choose kindness even when it costs them everything. There are still people who honor their promises to the dead by serving the living. You're not just someone's Tony Marconi, Crispin. You're exactly the kind of person Harold saw in me when I didn't deserve it, and exactly the kind of person I forgot I was supposed to be looking for." The words seemed to break something open in both men, years of carefully maintained professional distance dissolving into something raw and real and infinitely more valuable. "So where do we go from here?" Crispin asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and hope and fear all tangled together. "How do we move forward when everything we thought we knew about each other has been turned upside down?" Thaddeus looked around the safe house that had become their temporary prison and their unexpected sanctuary, thinking about corporate espionage rings and federal investigations and the complex web of threats that had brought them together. But more than that, he thought about Harold Brennan's wisdom, about Lorraine's deathbed promises, and about the possibility that sometimes the worst things that happen to you could become the foundation for the best things that were yet to come. "I think," he said slowly, "we start by admitting that neither of us is the man the other thought he was. And then we figure out how to become the men we want to be together." The breakthrough came on their 6th day in the safe house, when Thaddeus found Crispin sitting on the back porch at dawn, quietly weeping over a worn photograph of his wife and daughter. Something about the man's posture, shoulders curved inward as if protecting a physical wound, compelled Thaddeus to abandon his usual morning routine of checking stock prices and reading market reports. Instead, he poured 2 cups of coffee and stepped outside into the Virginia morning, where mist clung to the rolling hills like secrets waiting to be shared. "Sage called last night," Crispin said without looking up, his voice thick with emotion. "She wanted to thank me for the college deposit, but she also wanted to know why her father suddenly had access to that kind of money. Smart girl, just like her mother, too smart to believe that I'd been hiding a savings account from her." He lifted the photograph, and Thaddeus could see a beautiful woman with Sage's bright eyes standing beside a much younger Crispin, both of them radiating the kind of happiness that seemed to light up the entire picture. "I've been lying to her for 3 years, Thaddeus. Telling her that money wasn't tight, that I wasn't skipping meals so she could have new textbooks, that I wasn't working double shifts just to keep the lights on. I thought I was protecting her, but really I was protecting my own pride. What kind of father can't provide for his child's education without depending on the kindness of strangers? The raw vulnerability in his voice made Thaddeus's chest tighten, and he found himself sharing a truth he'd never spoken aloud. The kind who loves her more than his own ego, Thaddeus said quietly. When my grandmother was dying, I spent months lying to her about our financial situation. Told her the medical bills weren't a problem, that I had everything under control, that she should focus on getting better instead of worrying about money. The truth was, I was drowning, working myself into exhaustion and stealing to make ends meet. But I couldn't bear the thought of her spending her final months feeling guilty about the cost of staying alive. He settled into the chair beside Crispin, the morning air cool against his skin. It wasn't until years later that I realized my pride was robbing both of us. She knew I was struggling, grandmothers always know, and my refusal to admit it meant she died worried about me instead of feeling loved and cared for. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give the people we love is the truth about our limitations, because it allows them to love us back. The conversation opened something between them that had been carefully locked away, and over the following days, their forced proximity transformed from awkward coexistence into something neither man had expected: genuine friendship. They began sharing meals at the same table instead of eating in shifts, their conversations evolving from polite small talk to deep discussions about everything from business philosophy to parenting fears. Thaddeus discovered that Crispin had an encyclopedic knowledge of jazz music and could play piano with a kind of soulful touch that came from years of playing lullabies for a sick wife. Crispin learned that his billionaire boss had taught himself to cook during his grandmother's illness and still found comfort in preparing elaborate meals when stress threatened to overwhelm him. "Teach me," Crispin said one evening, watching Thaddeus prepare what appeared to be a gourmet feast from the safe house's basic ingredients. Lorraine was the cook in our family, and after she died, Sage and I lived on takeout and frozen dinners. I'd like to be able to make her a real meal when this is all over. The request touched something deep in Thaddeus's heart, and he found himself guiding Crispin through the process of making his grandmother's famous braised chicken, sharing stories and techniques with the same patient care Harold Brennan had once shown him. As they worked side by side, flour dusting their hands and the kitchen filling with aromatic steam, Thaddeus realized this was the first time in years he'd cooked for someone else, the first time he'd shared something meaningful without calculating the business advantage or strategic benefit. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Thaddeus said, watching Crispin carefully season the vegetables with the focused attention of a man who wanted to get everything exactly right. "I've been thinking about what kind of company I want to build when this is all over. Not what kind of company will be most profitable or most competitive, but what kind of company would make Harold proud? What kind of company would honor Lorraine's memory?" Crispin looked up from his careful chopping, something hopeful flickering in his eyes. "What did you have in mind?" "A partnership," Thaddeus said, the word carrying weight he hadn't fully understood until he spoke it aloud. "Not employer and employee, but true partners. You've shown me something I'd forgotten, that the best business model isn't built on distrust and surveillance, but on finding extraordinary people and giving them the freedom to be extraordinary. I want you to help me redesign everything from hiring practices to customer service protocols. I want the Crispin Holloway approach to become the Whitmore electronics standard." The idea took shape over the following evenings as they sat together planning not just a business transformation, but a complete reimagining of what success could look like. Crispin shared his observations about customer behavior, his theories about why kindness was more effective than security cameras, his dreams of creating retail spaces that felt more like community centers than transaction points. Thaddeus found himself energized in ways he hadn't experienced since his earliest entrepreneurial days, when business was about solving problems and serving people rather than maximizing quarterly profits. "What if," Crispin said one night, sketching ideas on napkins while they shared a bottle of wine Detective Rothschild had smuggled in, What if we created a program where customers could nominate families in need for electronics assistance? Like, imagine a single mother who needs a laptop for her kid's schoolwork but can't afford it. What if we had a way for other customers to contribute to a fund that would help families like that? The suggestion sparked something in Thaddeus's imagination, and he began building on the idea. We could call it the Harold Brennan Foundation, named after the man who taught me about second chances. Customers could round up their purchases to the nearest dollar, employees could volunteer to teach digital literacy classes, and we could partner with schools and community centers to identify families who need help. As they talked, their voices growing more animated with each new idea, both men realized they were designing something unprecedented, a for-profit business built on the foundation of radical compassion, where success would be measured not just in revenue but in lives changed and communities strengthened. "There's something else," Thaddeus said as their planning session wound down, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "I want you to know that regardless of what happens with this investigation, regardless of whether you decide to work with me or find something else entirely, Sage's education is taken care of. Full scholarship through her nursing degree, guaranteed internship placements, whatever she needs. This isn't about buying your forgiveness or securing your loyalty. This is about honoring the kind of father you are and the kind of daughter you've raised." Crispin's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time since they'd been brought to the safe house, they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. "You know what Lorraine would say if she could see us now?" he asked, his voice soft with wonder. "She'd say that sometimes God uses the worst things that happen to us to create space for the best things that are coming. She'd say that maybe we both needed to have our worlds turned upside down so we could see them right side up for the first time." The emotional climax of their bonding came on their 9th night together, when Crispin woke from a nightmare about Lorraine's final days and found Thaddeus sitting in the kitchen, unable to sleep because of his own demons. Without discussion, they made hot chocolate, Thaddeus's grandmother's recipe, and sat together in the darkness, each man offering the other the gift of presence without judgment. "I dream about her sometimes," Crispin admitted, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "But lately, the dreams have been different. Instead of watching her die over and over, I dream about introducing her to you, about her meeting Sage's graduation from nursing school, about all of us sitting around a dinner table laughing together. It's impossible, of course, but somehow those dreams feel more real than the nightmares." Thaddeus nodded, understanding exactly what his friend meant. "I dream about Harold meeting you. About him seeing what his investment in a desperate 19-year-old kid eventually became. About him knowing that his belief in second chances didn't die with him, that it's still alive and growing and changing lives." They sat in comfortable silence, two men who had found in each other something they hadn't even known they were looking for, not just business partnership or professional respect, but the kind of deep, abiding friendship that comes from seeing someone at their worst and choosing to believe in their best. "Crispin," Thaddeus said finally, "I need you to know that you've given me something I didn't realize I'd lost. You've reminded me that the point of having power isn't to protect yourself from people, but to use that power to lift other people up. You've shown me that the business philosophy Harold taught me wasn't just idealistic nonsense. It was the most practical wisdom anyone ever shared with me." Crispin reached across the table and clasped his friend's hand, the gesture carrying years of unspoken understanding. "And you've shown me that Lorraine was right, that the world is full of people waiting for the chance to do good, and sometimes all they need is someone to believe in them first. When this investigation is over, when we walk out of this place and back into the real world, I want to build something together that would make both Harold and Lorraine proud. I want to create the kind of company where other people like Kieran can find second chances, and other people like us can find their way back to the men they were meant to be." Outside, the Virginia dawn was breaking over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and both men understood that they were witnessing more than just another sunrise. They were seeing the beginning of something new, something built on trust and friendship and the radical belief that business could be a force for healing in a broken world. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on their 10th day in the safe house, shattering the peaceful routine Thaddeus and Crispin had built together like glass hitting concrete. Detective Rothschild's voice crackled through the secure phone line, tight with urgency and something that sounded dangerously close to panic. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. The espionage ring has escalated beyond anything we anticipated. They've kidnapped Sage." The words hit Crispin like a physical blow, and Thaddeus watched his friend's face cycle through disbelief, terror, and a rage so pure it was frightening to witness. "What do you mean kidnapped?" Crispin's voice was deadly quiet, the kind of calm that preceded violence. She was supposed to be safe at the diner, working her shift, completely removed from this situation. Detective Rothschild's response came through static and exhaustion. "They grabbed her from the employee parking lot around midnight. We have security footage showing a black SUV, professional operation, no plates. But here's the thing, they want to negotiate. They're demanding that Mr. Whitmore cease all expansion into the Southeast market and transfer controlling interest in 3 of his most profitable stores to a shell company they control. In exchange, they'll release Sage unharmed and disappear forever." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Crispin's breathing, which had become shallow and rapid. Thaddeus could see his friend's hand shaking, could practically feel the waves of paternal terror radiating from across the table. "How long do we have?" Thaddeus asked, though he was already mentally calculating the value of what they were demanding, roughly $40 million in assets, plus the strategic foothold that would allow them to systematically dismantle everything he'd spent 2 decades building. 12 hours, Detective Rothschild said, and both men could hear the frustration in her voice. "They've been planning this for months, maybe years." The frame up against Mr. Holloway was just the opening move, designed to flush you both out into the open where they could gather intelligence and identify pressure points. Sage was always their primary target. They knew that threatening her would be the one thing that could force both of you to comply with their demands. Crispin stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that seemed to echo in the sudden tension. "Give them whatever they want," he said, his voice brooking no argument. "I don't care about business assets or market expansion or any of that corporate bullshit. Give them everything they're asking for and get my daughter back." But Thaddeus was already shaking his head, his mind racing through implications and consequences. "Crispin, you don't understand. If we give in to this, it won't end with Sage. These people don't honor agreements, they escalate. Today it's 40 million and 3 stores. Next month it'll be the entire company. Next year it'll be other business owners, other families, other daughters. We can't negotiate with terrorists, especially when they're holding someone we love." The words hung in the air like a lit fuse, and Crispin turned on his friend with a fury that had been building since the moment Detective Rothschild spoke Sage's name. "Easy for you to say, isn't it? You don't have children. You don't know what it's like to love someone more than your own life, to have made promises to a dying woman about protecting the only family you have left. This is my daughter we're talking about, Thaddeus. My brilliant, beautiful girl who's never hurt anyone in her life, who's worked double shifts to pay for her own education while I've been pretending I could provide for her. And you want me to risk her life for what? Business principles? Corporate ethics?" The accusation hit Thaddeus like a slap, carrying with it years of unspoken differences in their life experiences. "That's not fair, and you know it," Thaddeus responded, his own voice rising with emotion. "You think I don't care about Sage? You think I haven't spent the last 10 days thinking of her as the daughter I never had, planning her future like she was my own family? But giving these people what they want won't save her, it'll just make her a target for the rest of her life. Don't you dare talk about my daughter like you know what's best for her," Crispin shot back, his pain transforming into anger that needed somewhere to go. Don't you dare stand there in your expensive clothes with your billionaire solutions and tell me that my child's life is an acceptable sacrifice for your business empire. You know what this is really about? This is about you protecting your precious company, your legacy, your reputation. This is about Thaddeus Whitmore refusing to admit that maybe, just maybe, some things are more important than winning. The words struck deep, finding every insecurity and doubt that Thaddeus had been carrying since the night he first saw Crispin give away his life savings to a stranger. "That's not true," he said, but even as he spoke, he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. "I'm trying to protect her, protect all of us, by not giving these criminals the power to destroy more lives." But Crispin was beyond hearing reasonable arguments, his father's heart overriding every other consideration. "You want to know what I think this is really about? I think you're angry that someone finally found a way to hurt the great Thaddeus Whitmore, and you can't stand the idea of losing. I think you're so used to winning every battle, so accustomed to being the smartest person in the room, that you'd rather risk my daughter's life than admit you've been outmaneuvered." The accusation hung between them like poison, transforming the safe house from a sanctuary into a battlefield. "You think I'm willing to sacrifice Sage for business reasons?" Thaddeus's voice was dangerously quiet now, his own anger finally breaking through the careful control he'd maintained. "Let me tell you something about sacrifice, Crispin. Let me tell you about sitting in a hospital room watching the only person who ever loved you die because you couldn't afford the treatment that might have saved her. Let me tell you about carrying that guilt for 23 years, about building a fortune on the foundation of someone else's death. You think I don't understand loss? You think I don't know what it's like to have everything you care about ripped away from you?" His hands were shaking now, years of buried grief and guilt spilling out in a torrent of words. "But here's the difference between us. When my grandmother died because I couldn't save her, I didn't have the luxury of blaming someone else. I had to live with the knowledge that my choices, my failures, my weakness cost the life of the person I loved most. And I swore I'd never let that happen again." The fight escalated from there. Two men who had found brotherhood in shared pain, now using that same pain as weapons against each other. "So that's it." Crispin's voice was raw with betrayal. "You're going to hide behind your dead grandmother's memory to justify letting my daughter die? You're going to make this about your guilt instead of her life." The accusation was so unfair, so deliberately cruel, that it seemed to break something fundamental in both men. "I'm trying to save her," Thaddeus shouted, his careful composure finally shattering completely. "I'm trying to save all of us by not giving these people the power to do this again and again. But you're so consumed with your own fear, so determined to see me as the enemy, that you can't see past your own panic." Crispin's response was quieter but infinitely more devastating. "You know what I see when I look at you right now, Thaddeus? I see a man who's so afraid of being vulnerable, so terrified of not being in control, that he'd rather lose everything than admit he doesn't have all the answers. I see someone who talks about Harold Brennan's wisdom and Lorraine's legacy, but when it really matters, when the choice is between your pride and someone else's life, you choose pride every single time." The words hit their target with surgical precision, and both men stood in the sudden silence, breathing hard, staring at each other across a chasm that seemed to have opened between them in the space of minutes. Everything they had built together over the past 10 days, the friendship, the trust, the shared dreams of building something better, lay in ruins around them like the aftermath of an earthquake. "Fine," Thaddeus said finally, his voice cold and distant. "You want me to be the villain in this story? You want to believe that I'm willing to sacrifice Sage for business reasons? Then that's what I'll be. But don't come crying to me when giving these criminals everything they want doesn't end the way you think it will." Crispin's response was equally cold. "And don't expect me to thank you when your precious principles get my daughter killed. When this is over, if she survives your noble stand, I never want to see you again. I was wrong about you, Thaddeus. I thought you were different, Thought you understood what it meant to put people before profit. But you're just another rich man who thinks money makes him wise, and I was a fool to believe otherwise." As both men retreated to opposite ends of the safe house, the weight of what they'd said to each other settled over them like a shroud. Outside, dawn was breaking over the Virginia hills, but inside, it felt like the darkest night either man had ever experienced. The partnership they had dreamed of building, the friendship that had bloomed from shared pain and mutual respect, the hope that they could create something beautiful from the ashes of their individual tragedies, all of it was gone, destroyed by fear and pride and the terrible realization that sometimes, no matter how much you care about someone, you can still find ways to hurt them beyond repair. The hours after their devastating fight passed like a slow-motion nightmare, with Thaddeus and Crispin occupying opposite ends of the safe house like wounded animals, each man consumed by his own demons while the clock counted down toward a deadline that would determine Sage's fate. Thaddeus sat in the master bedroom, his laptop open to financial documents he couldn't focus on, his phone buzzing with calls from lawyers and advisors that he ignored. Every few minutes, he found himself reaching for the secure phone to call Detective Rothschild and authorize the transfer of assets the kidnappers demanded, only to stop himself as Harold Brennan's voice echoed in his memory. "Son, the easy choice and the right choice are rarely the same thing." But Harold had never been asked to choose between principles and the life of an innocent girl, a girl who had become as precious to Thaddeus as if she were his own daughter. At 6:23 a.m., with less than 6 hours remaining before the deadline, his phone rang with a call that changed everything. "Mr. Whitmore?" The voice was young, female, and terrifyingly familiar. "This is Sage Holloway. I need you to listen very carefully." Thaddeus nearly dropped the phone, his heart hammering as he processed the impossibility of hearing her voice. "Sage? Are you hurt? Where are you?" But her response was whispered, urgent, and filled with a kind of calm intelligence that reminded him powerfully of her father. "I'm okay for now, but I don't have much time. They think I'm unconscious. I've been pretending for the last 2 hours, listening to their plans. Mr. Whitmore, you cannot give them what they want. This isn't just about money or business. They're planning something much worse." The line crackled with static, and Thaddeus could hear muffled voices in the background, the sound of footsteps on concrete. "They have files on dozens of other business owners, other families. If you give in to their demands, they're going to use your capitulation as proof of concept to expand their operation nationwide. They're building a systematic extortion network, and your cooperation would be the cornerstone that makes it all possible." Meanwhile, 2 rooms away, Crispin sat on the edge of the guest bed, clutching the photograph of Lorraine and Sage that had become his anchor in this storm of uncertainty. His hands shook as he stared at his wife's face, trying to hear her voice through the static of his own terror and rage. "What would you tell me to do, baby?" he whispered to the picture. "How do I choose between our daughter's life and doing what's right?" For 3 hours, he had been composing angry text messages to Thaddeus that he deleted before sending, his fury warring with a growing recognition that his former friend, might not be the selfish corporate villain Crispin had painted him as in their fight. The truth was more complex and more painful. Thaddeus was trying to save Sage by refusing to enable the very system that had targeted her in the first place. It was a horrible calculus, but it wasn't born from callousness or greed. It was born from a kind of moral courage that Crispin wasn't sure he possessed himself. His internal struggle was interrupted by a soft knock on his door, followed by Thaddeus's voice, quiet and raw with exhaustion. "Crispin? I need to tell you something," Sage called. The door opened before Crispin could respond, and he saw his friend, and Thaddeus was still his friend, despite everything they'd said to each other, standing in the doorway with tears streaming down his face. "She's alive, she's brilliant, and she's her father's daughter in every way that matters." For the next 10 minutes, Thaddeus relayed every detail of Sage's call, from her strategic thinking about the kidnappers' larger plans to her explicit instruction that they must not negotiate. She said something else, Thaddeus added, his voice thick with emotion. She said to tell her father that she's been listening to everything he taught her about doing the right thing even when it's hard, and that she's proud to be the daughter of a man who gave his life savings to a stranger because it was the right thing to do. The message broke something open in Crispin's chest, and he found himself sobbing, not just from relief that his daughter was alive, but from the overwhelming recognition of how deeply he had misjudged both Sage's strength and Thaddeus's motivations. "I owe you an apology," Crispin said when he could finally speak again, his voice hoarse from crying. "I said terrible things to you, accused you of caring more about money than about Sage's life. But you were right. Giving these people what they want wouldn't save her, it would just make her a target forever. And more than that, it would betray everything she's been raised to believe about standing up to bullies and protecting innocent people." Thaddeus sat down heavily in the chair across from him, looking older than his 42 years. "You don't owe me any apology, Crispin. You were a father terrified for his child's life, and I was asking you to make an impossible choice. If our positions were reversed, if it was my daughter in danger, I probably would have said things that were 10 times worse." He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "But here's what I've been thinking about while we've been apart. Sage is right about the bigger picture, but she's also taking a huge risk by refusing rescue. These people aren't going to just let her go. When the deadline passes, they're going to hurt her, possibly kill her, and then move on to their next target. So we need a third option, something that saves Sage without giving them what they want." The idea that had been forming in the back of Thaddeus's mind finally crystallized into words. What if we don't negotiate with them? What if we hunt them down? Crispin looked up sharply, seeing something in his friend's expression that was both terrifying and oddly comforting. "You're talking about vigilante justice. You're talking about risking everything, our lives, our freedom, our futures, on the chance that we can find her before they hurt her." But Thaddeus was already nodding, his decision made. "I'm talking about remembering what Harold Brennan taught me about fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. I'm talking about honoring Lorraine's memory by refusing to let evil people win through intimidation. Most of all, I'm talking about saving the daughter of the best man I've ever known, even if it costs me everything I've spent 23 years building." The words hung between them like a bridge, and Crispin felt something shift in his chest, not just forgiveness for the things they'd said to each other in anger, but a recognition that their friendship had been tested by fire and had somehow emerged stronger than before. "Detective Rothschild will never authorize an unsanctioned rescue operation," Crispin pointed out, though his voice already carried the tone of someone who was committed to the plan regardless of official approval. "She has protocols to follow, federal guidelines that prioritize negotiation over direct action. If we're going to do this, we'll be on our own." Thaddeus pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the name he was looking for. "Not entirely on our own. I have resources that law enforcement doesn't, private security contractors, surveillance specialists, people who owe me favors and don't care much about federal protocols. Harold Brennan didn't just teach me about kindness and second chances. He also taught me that sometimes, when the system fails to protect innocent people, good people have to step outside the system." For the next hour, they worked together with the focused intensity of men who had found their purpose. Thaddeus made calls to security experts and former military contractors, assembling a team of professionals who specialized in exactly the kind of off-the-books operation they were planning. Crispin used his knowledge of criminal behavior, gained from years of working security, to analyze the kidnappers' likely location and tactical approach. By 10:30 a.m., with less than 2 hours until the deadline, they had a plan that was dangerous, possibly illegal, and almost certainly their daughter's best chance at survival. "Before we do this," Thaddeus said as they prepared to leave the safe house, "I need you to know something. If this goes wrong, if we don't make it out of this alive, I want you to know that these past 10 days have been the best of my life. Not because of the business plans we made or the partnership we discussed, but because I finally understood what Harold was trying to teach me about the difference between success and significance. You've shown me how to be a better man, Crispin. Whatever happens today, that's a debt I can never repay. Crispin clasped his friend's shoulder, feeling the weight of everything they'd shared and everything they were about to risk. You already repaid it by being willing to risk everything for my daughter. You repaid it by choosing to see her as family instead of as collateral damage in someone else's war. That's the kind of man Harold was trying to turn you into, and that's the kind of man Lorraine would have been proud to call friend. The rescue operation unfolded with military precision and desperate improvisation in equal measure. Using cell phone triangulation and traffic camera analysis, Thaddeus's security team tracked the kidnappers to an abandoned warehouse complex 30 miles outside Richmond, Virginia. The location was isolated, defensible, and exactly the kind of place where screams wouldn't be heard by anyone who might care. As they approached the target, Crispin felt a strange calm settle over him, not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger than fear. This was what Lorraine had been preparing him for during all those late-night conversations about raising Sage to be strong and independent. This was the moment when all of his beliefs about protecting family and standing up to bullies would be tested in the most literal way possible. Remember, Thaddeus said as they positioned themselves around the warehouse, we're not here to be heroes. We're here to get Sage out safely and let law enforcement handle the rest. No unnecessary risks, no heroic gestures that could get anyone killed. But even as he spoke, both men understood that heroism wasn't about choosing to take risks. It was about being willing to take necessary risks for people who mattered more than your own safety. The warehouse assault lasted less than 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes contained more raw terror and desperate hope than either man had ever experienced. They found Sage in a windowless room in the building's basement, her hand zip-tied but her spirit unbroken, her eyes blazing with a kind of fierce determination that reminded Crispin powerfully of her mother. "Dad?" she whispered as he cut her restraints, and the single word carried 20 years of love and trust and absolute faith that her father would always find a way to save her. "I knew you'd come. I knew you wouldn't give them what they wanted, because that's not who you raised me to be." As sirens wailed in the distance, Detective Rothschild and the FBI arriving just in time to arrest the kidnappers and secure the evidence that would dismantle the entire extortion network, Thaddeus and Crispin stood together watching father and daughter embrace. "So," Crispin said, his voice thick with exhaustion and relief and something that might have been joy, "what do we do now?" Thaddeus looked around at the warehouse that had nearly become a tomb, at the federal agents securing the scene, at the reunion between a father and daughter that represented everything good and decent about the world they were trying to protect. "Now," he said, "we go home and build the kind of company that would make Harold and Lorraine proud. We build something that's worthy of what Sage just went through to protect." 6 months after the warehouse rescue, Thaddeus stood in the gleaming lobby of the newly opened Whitmore Holloway Community Electronics Center, watching Sage cut the ribbon that would officially launch their revolutionary business model. The young woman who had once been a kidnapping victim now served as the company's director of community outreach, her nursing degree complemented by an MBA that Thaddeus had insisted on funding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sage said, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had sustained her through her ordeal, "this isn't just a store, it's a promise. A promise that technology should serve communities, not exploit them. A promise that businesses can be profitable while still putting people first. And a promise that when good people work together, they can create something beautiful from even the darkest circumstances." The ribbon fell away to reveal an interior that looked nothing like a traditional electronics store. Instead of high-pressure sales tactics and security cameras, the space featured comfortable seating areas where customers could learn about new technology, a job training center where community members could develop digital skills, and a quiet corner dedicated to the Harold Brennan Second Chance program, the initiative that had already helped more than 200 families access technology they couldn't otherwise afford. Crispin, now serving as the company's chief operating partner, stood beside his daughter with tears in his eyes as he watched their shared vision become reality. The transformation hadn't been easy, redesigning an entire corporate culture, retraining staff across 12 locations, convincing investors that compassion could be profitable, but every challenge had been worth it to reach this moment. The first customer through the doors was Mrs. Valdez. The elderly woman Crispin had helped months earlier, now accompanied by her granddaughter who was visiting from college. "Mr. Crispin," she called out in her accented English, "you said this day would come, and here it is. A store that feels like family." As Thaddeus watched the two women embrace Crispin with genuine affection, he understood that they had created something unprecedented, a business model built not on transactions, but on relationships. The success of their pilot program had attracted national attention, but more importantly, it had attracted the attention of other business owners who wanted to implement similar approaches in their own companies. Every week brought new requests for consultation, speaking engagements, and partnership opportunities from entrepreneurs who had grown tired of treating employees and customers as variables in a profit equation rather than as human beings deserving of dignity and respect. The waiting list for our business ethics seminar series is now over 6 months long, Sage reported during their weekly leadership meeting, her laptop displaying charts that showed metrics they'd never tracked before: customer loyalty scores, employee happiness indexes, community impact assessments. "We've had inquiries from companies in 37 states and 12 countries, all wanting to learn how to implement the Whitmore-Holloway model in their own organizations. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of their success was the transformation they'd witnessed in their own employees." Marcus Chun, a young man who had been caught stealing from the original store, now served as their head of loss prevention, not through surveillance and suspicion, but through the same kind of compassionate intervention that had changed Kieran's life. "People don't steal because they're evil," Marcus explained to a group of visiting business students. "They steal because they're desperate, and desperation makes good people do terrible things. Our job isn't to catch criminals, it's to catch people before they become criminals, and help them find better solutions to whatever problems brought them to our door." The ripple effects extended far beyond their company walls. Kieran, the young man whose attempted theft had inadvertently sparked the entire corporate espionage investigation, had completed his GED and was now enrolled in community college, studying business management with the dream of opening his own nonprofit organization. His sister Maeve's diabetes was well controlled, thanks to a comprehensive health care plan that Whitmore-Holloway provided for all employees and their families, and the siblings had moved into a modest but comfortable apartment where the electricity never got turned off. "Some nights I lie awake thinking about that moment in the store," Kieran had told Thaddeus during one of their monthly mentorship meetings. "Not because I'm ashamed of it, though I was for a long time, but because I'm amazed by what can happen when someone chooses to see the person behind the problem." The corporate espionage case had concluded with convictions for all 17 members of the criminal network, but the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the demonstration that businesses could thrive without participating in the ruthless competition and systematic dehumanization that had made such criminal enterprises possible in the first place. Detective Rothschild, who had become something of a friend to both men, often pointed to their case as an example of how corporate culture could either enable criminal behavior or create environments so healthy that crime became unnecessary. "What you two accomplished," she told them during the one-year anniversary celebration of Sage's rescue, "was proving that ethical business practices aren't just morally superior. They're actually more effective at achieving long-term success than the cutthroat approaches that most companies consider normal." The celebration took place not in a corporate boardroom, but in the community center where Crispin still taught digital literacy classes every Saturday morning. The guest list included not just business partners and investors, but also the families they'd helped, the employees whose lives had been transformed, and the community leaders who had embraced their vision of commerce as a tool for social healing. As Thaddeus looked around the room, seeing Mrs. Valdez teaching smartphone photography to a group of teenagers, watching Kieran help an elderly veteran navigate online banking, observing Sage and her father work together to help a single mother understand the financial aid application process. He realized that they had created something far more valuable than a profitable business. They had created a model for how capitalism could serve humanity instead of exploiting it. You know what Harold would say if he could see all this? Thaddeus asked Crispin as they stood together watching the celebration unfold around them. He'd say that the best investment he ever made wasn't the money he spent on my grandmother's medical bills. It was the faith he showed in a desperate young man who thought he was beyond redemption. Crispin nodded, his arm around Sage's shoulders as she laughed at something one of the community college students had said. And Lorraine would say that love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to grow and spread and touch lives that the original person never even imagined. The evening concluded with an announcement that surprised even Sage and Crispin, though Thaddeus had been planning it for months. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, calling for attention as the celebration began to wind down, "I have some news to share. Next month, Whitmore Holloway will be launching our most ambitious project yet, the National Second Chance Business Initiative, a program designed to help formerly incarcerated individuals start their own companies using the same principles of dignity, respect, and community support that have guided our work here." The room erupted in applause, but Thaddeus held up his hand, indicating he wasn't finished. "This program will be led by someone who understands better than anyone the power of second chances and the importance of seeing potential where others see only problems. I'm proud to announce that Kieran Murphy, who many of you know as both a friend and an inspiration, will serve as the initiative's first director, working alongside a team of successful entrepreneurs, former law enforcement officers, and community leaders to create pathways from poverty to prosperity that don't require anyone to compromise their integrity or abandon their values. Kieran, who had been standing near the back of the room, looked stunned as the crowd turned toward him with warm applause. As he made his way forward to accept what was essentially a dream job he'd never dared to imagine, Thaddeus caught sight of something that made his chest tighten with emotion. In the corner of the room, partially hidden behind a group of celebrating families, stood a maintenance worker he didn't recognize, a young black man in work clothes, watching the proceedings with the same mixture of hope and skepticism that Thaddeus remembered feeling 23 years earlier when Harold Brennan had first offered him a chance at redemption. Without hesitation, Thaddeus made his way across the room, extending his hand to the stranger. "Hi there, I'm Thaddeus Whitmore. I don't think we've met." The young man looked surprised, but shook the offered hand. "Jamal Washington, sir. I work maintenance for the community center. Just finishing up before I head home." Something in the young man's voice, a careful politeness that didn't quite hide underlying worry, reminded Thaddeus powerfully of himself at that age. "Jamal, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you happy with your work here? Do you have other goals, other dreams you're working toward?" The question seemed to catch Jamal off guard, and for a moment, his careful composure slipped, revealing something raw and hopeful underneath. "Actually, sir, I've been thinking about maybe going back to school, studying business or computer programming. But with my work schedule and my family situation." He trailed off, perhaps recognizing that he was sharing more with a stranger than he'd intended. Thaddeus smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of recognizing potential that others might overlook. "Jamal, how would you feel about having coffee sometime next week? I'd love to hear more about your goals, and I might be able to help you figure out some solutions to those scheduling and financial challenges." As they exchanged contact information and said their goodbyes, Thaddeus understood that this was how Harold's legacy would continue, not through grand gestures or corporate philanthropy, but through countless individual moments of recognition and investment, one person at a time, one second chance at a time, one act of faith in human potential at a time. The circle that had begun with a desperate teenager stealing from a cash register had expanded to encompass hundreds of lives, and it would continue expanding as long as people like Crispin and Sage and Kieran carried forward the simple but revolutionary belief that everyone deserved to be seen, valued, and given the opportunity to become their best selves. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are really just beginnings in disguise. Thaddeus and Crispin's journey from suspicion to friendship to partnership shows us that when we choose trust over fear, compassion over judgment, we don't just change our own lives. We create ripples that can transform entire communities. What would happen if more businesses operated like Whitmore Holloway? What would happen if we all looked for the Jamals in our own communities and offered them the same kind of second chance that Harold gave Thaddeus? Share your thoughts below, because maybe the next great transformation starts with a conversation in the comments section. **